In 1851, an emperor rose. But at what cost?
This civil war killed more people than World War I. But the leader wasn't a general. He was a man who failed his exams and thought he was Jesus' younger brother.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge, a cataclysm of history that, well, often gets sidelined in the grand scheme of things. Imagine a civil war so devastating it claimed, tens of millions of lives. It dwarfs so many conflicts we learn about routinely. It didn't just shatter an empire, it fundamentally rerouted China's entire path, sowing the seeds for its modern revolutions. But what really fueled this inferno, and what kind of unexpected legacies, maybe even paradoxical ones, did it leave behind? That's what we're diving into today.
Exactly. We are embarking on a very thorough exploration of the Taiping Rebellion. This was a cataclysmic civil war that just ravaged China from 1850 to 1864. And while its sheer monumental scale and impact are often, frankly, underestimated in global history books. Its influence on China's path towards modernity and all the revolutionary movements that followed is just undeniable. Our analysis today will dig into its really complex origins, the unique kind of syncretic religious ideology that drove it, the actual course of the conflict. It's a staggering human cost, the environmental toll too, and critically, how recent scholarship, stuff from just the last few years, 2020 to 2025, is reevaluating its long-term effects, some really counterintuitive impacts on Chinese society.
Okay, and you've given us a fantastic stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got academic papers like Hong Xiuquan and Religious Ideology of the Taiping Rebellion. There's an in-depth look at its global repercussions. And then this cutting-edge research you mentioned, uncovering these surprising long-term effects. So this deep dive is really custom-tailored for you, the listener. Whether you're, say, a nurse used to navigating complex information or just someone incredibly curious about getting to the bottom of things, our goal isn't just to inform, it's to meticulously pull out and unpack every critical piece of knowledge. We want you to come away feeling not just informed, but truly well-informed, and without feeling buried by the sheer volume of detail. We'll break down every statement, look at every angle, and really try to leave nothing out.
And that really raises a key question. Why should this 19th century Chinese Civil War matter to us today, right? What's fascinating here, I think, is how this historical case study reveals these, universal patterns of societal breakdown. It shows the complex dance between deep internal problems and, external shocks that destabilize things. And it reveals these often unexpected ways that radical upheaval, despite its, horrific immediate costs, can sometimes paradoxically trigger long-term institutional change. That's a phenomenon highly relevant for understanding systemic risks, societal resilience, especially in our world today. So through this, you'll gain a richer, more nuanced view of that really complex relationship between belief, power, and how societies transform, sometimes irreversibly.
Okay, let's start by digging into the conditions that made such a massive uprising, even possible. What was the Qing Empire actually like in the mid-19th century? What were these deep-seated crises just simmering beneath the surface?
Well, by the 19th century, the Qing Empire was, you could say, ripe for crisis. A whole confluence of economic, social, and political vulnerabilities had already taken root. It created what one of our sources calls a perfect storm, all these interconnected crises feeding off each other. We can break these down into really several interdependent factors.
Right. You mentioned the Qing government was seen as weak and corrupt. Can you give us some specific examples? How did this administrative decay actually hit ordinary people?
Absolutely. The government was widely perceived as weak, yes, corrupt, and just profoundly inefficient. This wasn't just perception. It led to a real pervasive sense of dispossession among ordinary people. It manifested in concrete policies with disastrous outcomes. For instance, the sale of official posts became commonplace.
Selling government jobs.
Exactly. And this created a really vicious cycle of corruption. Officials who paid for their jobs would then arbitrarily hike taxes on the common people, especially peasants, to recoup their investment and, enrich themselves. This put a huge burden on an already struggling population. The Manchu administration itself suffered from stagnation, inefficiency, and just widespread demoralization. This was obvious in its inability to effectively suppress early local uprisings or even resist foreign incursions. Economically, land was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few powerful gentry officials and large landowners, leaving millions of peasants with little protection against exploitation. This kind of feudal system, plus exorbitant taxes and rents, just generated immense frustration. It pushed people towards desperation. And the sources are explicit. This corruption meant funds meant for crucial infrastructure, like maintaining dikes, were diverted.
Ah, so that made them more vulnerable to floods.
Precisely. It highlights this feedback loop. Governmental failure makes environmental vulnerability worse, which then fuels popular anger and provides desperate recruits for any rebellion promising change.
Okay, so like a leaky boat, too many holes from corruption and inefficiency, and not enough buckets, not enough effective governance to bail it out.
That's a good way to put it. A decaying structure, vulnerable from within.
So beyond these internal problems, how did foreign interference, specifically the Opium Wars, destabilize China further and actually fuel anti-government feelings?
Right. This is where internal decay meets external pressure and things get really explosive. China's defeat in the First Opium War, that was 1839 to 1842, and the Treaty of Nanjing that followed in 1842 were just profoundly humiliating and economically crippling.
How so, economically?
While China was forced to pay huge reparations to Britain and open up more ports to foreign trade, this meant a sudden flood of cheap foreign textiles hit the market. It basically ruined local industries. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese people, porters, boatmen, weavers, people whose livelihoods depended on traditional trades were suddenly out of work.
Wow, that's massive unemployment.
Huge. It created this vast pool of unemployed, disenfranchised people. Ready recruits, really, for any movement promising change. The treaty also severely eroded Chinese sovereignty through extraterritoriality.
What's that exactly?
It meant foreigners in China were subject to their own country's laws, not Chinese law. A huge blow to sovereignty. All this deeply undermined the emperor's prestige, fueled massive anti-government sentiment. People saw their rulers as weak, unable to protect the nation. So this external pressure just amplified all the existing internal problems. It created this climate of, well, profound discontent.
Okay, massive population growth plus natural disasters.
Mhm.
That sounds like a recipe for catastrophe. What were the actual numbers, and how did this pressure play out for ordinary families?
It really was a demographic time bomb. The Chinese population almost doubled in a century. It went from about 180 million in 1751 to an incredible 430 million by 1851.
430 million, that's astonishing growth.
It is, and crucially, this happened without a corresponding increase in farmland, so the amount of cultivated land per person dropped drastically. Intense pressure, land scarcity.
More mouths, same amount of food, basically.
Right, exactly. Then add agricultural failures from severe natural disasters, particularly devastating floods and famines in the late 1840s. These just plunged countless peasant families into absolute dire straits. Epidemics were also common, further destabilizing things, weakening people, making them even more vulnerable. And remember, the corruption diverting funds from things like dike maintenance.
Yes, the leaky boat.
Right. So these environmental shocks, hitting a system already weakened by corruption, directly fueled recruitment into rebel movements. People were desperate.
You have to try and picture it. Landscapes just scarred by starving people, homes washed away, everyone just desperately looking for any glimmer of hope, utter desolation. In times like these, secret societies often pop up as centers of resistance, don't they? What was their role here, and how do they differ from the official Qing order?
Absolutely. Amidst this widespread crisis, secret societies grew dramatically in size and importance. They became havens, really, for the persecuted, the politically voiceless. They vowed to help each other, give refuge, defend members against outsiders and the government. Structurally, they often had a kind of quasi-military setup, a clear hierarchy, sometimes linked to organized crime too. But for many of the poorest, these societies were the only defense against pressure from the administration, or even from conflicts between villages or ethnic groups fighting over scarce resources. Ideologically, they drew on popular religious ideas, Buddhist and Taoist traditions. They strongly emphasized brotherhood and equality among members.
Which would stand in stark contrast to the Qing's rigid hierarchy.
Precisely. A direct opposition to the official Neo-Confucian principles of the Qing state. They shared common traditions, including that powerful slogan, "Oppose the Qing and restore the Ming," referring to the previous Han Chinese dynasty. This anti-Qing activity was especially strong in Guangdong and Guangxi provinces, places with a history of resisting the Manchus, and it's exactly there where the Taiping Rebellion would eventually ignite. Try to put yourself in the shoes of a peasant back then, stripped of your land, facing starvation, ignored by officials. These secret societies offered something tangible: community, protection. It wasn't just abstract ideology, it was about survival. A stark contrast to the distant, ineffective imperial bureaucracy.
Okay, let's pause for a quick micro recap of this first part. So the Qing dynasty in the mid-19th century was basically a powder keg. We saw deep internal corruption, administrative decay, the humiliation and economic chaos from the Opium Wars, huge demographic pressure causing poverty and land scarcity, and devastating natural disasters. All this created fertile ground for mass discontent and the rise of these secret societies pushing for change. A multi-crisis situation, really, where every problem made the others worse, leading towards systemic collapse.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, it's important to push back against oversimplification. The Taiping Rebellion wasn't just a reaction to one single thing. Recent academic work, like Bai Ni in 2020 and Lai Zhu and Yang in 2023, really emphasizes the complex interdependencies of these crises.
How so?
Well, for example, government corruption didn't just mean less money for dikes, making people vulnerable to floods. It also alienated potential allies by creating a system based on arbitrary power, not merit. And the economic disruption from foreign trade directly created that huge pool of unemployed people who then became recruits. It's not just a list of problems, it's a feedback loop, a multi-crisis scenario where systemic collapse unfolds through these compounding vulnerabilities. It shows that societal collapses are rarely caused by just one thing.
Right, challenging those simpler narratives.
Exactly. So in essence, the Qing dynasty was teetering on the edge of collapse, undermined by its own internal weaknesses, external humiliations, and the sheer demographic and environmental pressures pushing people to the brink. This created a profound demand for a new order, setting the stage perfectly for the emergence of a radical new ideology and leader.
Okay, to help you lock this in, here's some quick bullet point flashcards. Qing, corruption, inefficiency, arbitrary taxes. Opium Wars, reparations, open ports, ruined industries, humiliation, demographics, population boom, 180 m to 430 m, land scarcity, environment, late 1840s floods and famines, epidemics, secret societies, offered brotherhood, equality, anti-Qing sentiment, restore the Ming. And a quick question to test yourself. Which of the following wasn't a primary cause contributing to the ripe conditions for the Taiping Rebellion? A. Rapid population growth. B. Decisive Qing victories against foreign powers. C. Widespread governmental corruption. D. Devastating natural disasters. The answer is B. Qing defeats, not victories, were a major factor. So against this backdrop of immense crisis, this singular figure emerges, Hong Xiuquan. His story is absolutely central here. Let's start with his early life. How did he become this radical leader?
Hong Xiuquan, born in Guangdong in 1814. He really represents a fascinating blend, a mix of traditional Chinese ambitions and these really transformative foreign influences. His early life put him on a path of disillusionment that would fundamentally reshape his worldview and ultimately China itself.
Right, he was a student who kept failing the civil service exams. How did those personal setbacks contribute to his radicalization, his turning away from Confucianism?
Well, despite his family being farmers, Hong really wanted to become a civil servant. His relatives weren't keen initially. He made 4 attempts at the imperial exams, all failures.
4 times. That must have been crushing.
Absolutely, and profoundly significant. It forced him to confront the illusions he held about the traditional system, and by extension, the Confucian ideology behind it. He even tried to get baptized by a preacher early on, but was turned down. So he faced rejection from both the traditional Chinese elite path and the Western missionary side.
Double rejection.
Exactly. It created fertile ground for a unique mix of ideas. His main source on Christianity between 1833 and 1847 was this book, Liang Fa's Quanxi Lianyan, or Good Words to Exhort the World. It was an eclectic collection, but had bits of the Old and New Testaments. Liang Fa argued Chinese life had led people into selfish oblivion of moral purity. Hong took these ideas further. He saw Chinese society as deadlocked, saw a change of dynasty as almost inevitable. This marks his growing disillusionment with Confucianism, his shift to an alternative view. He quit his job as a village tutor in 1844, realizing he couldn't stay. That's when his transformation into a rebel leader really began.
Okay, so after one of these exam failures, he had these incredibly vivid dreams or visions. How did they manifest? What meaning did he later take from them?
This is really the core of his transformation, the metaphysical part. After his third failure in 1837, the stress was just unbearable. He had a severe nervous breakdown. For over a month, he was in this stupor, barely moving, experiencing a series of incredibly vivid dreams he believed were divine messages. He saw himself ascending to a palace, welcomed by figures, music playing, An old woman cleansed him. His heart and organs were physically replaced, he said, his wounds healing instantly.
Replaced, like literally.
That's how he described it. Then, a large man in a black robe with a long golden beard appeared. This figure lamented that humans had forgotten him and were worshipping demons. He tasked Hong with eradicating these demons, giving him a golden seal, fruit, and a sword. Hong woke up shouting, "The venerable old man above has commanded that all men shall turn to me, and all treasure shall flow to me." He hallucinated traveling the universe with middle-aged men slaying demons. He believed he was made emperor of China. He even took a new name, Xiuquan, meaning perfect.
Well, it's
Yeah.
intense.
Extremely. For years, he struggled to understand it all, until 1843, when a relative urged him to reread that book, Good Words to Exhort the World. When he did, it clicked. He had this wave of joy, believing the figures in his vision were Jehovah, the venerable old man, and Jesus Christ, the middle-aged man, his heavenly father, and his older brother.
The older brother.
Yes. This revelation gave him the framework for his unique mission. It marked his conversion, really, and the start of the God-worshipping society. You can almost map it out psychologically. Intense pressure, personal failure, leads to a stress-induced breakdown, then vivid hallucinations. And finally, a reinterpretation loop through this religious text provides a coherent divine explanation for the trauma, turning it into a mandate for action. It's a pattern sometimes seen in figures who start mass movements.
So his journey then led him to actual contact with Western missionaries. What happened when he met Issachar Roberts? Why did they part ways?
Right. In 1847, he finally met a Western preacher, Issachar Jacob Roberts, a Protestant missionary in Canton. Hong was initially thrilled, seeing Roberts as a counterpart. Roberts agreed to explain Christian doctrine, but the relationship quickly fractured. As one scholar, P.M. Yap, suggests, they just couldn't find common ground on the most important issues. Roberts likely wanted to baptize Hong, bring him into the Orthodox fold, but Hong's followers refused. Roberts also denied Hong any financial support, which Hong seems to have been seeking.
Oh, money was an issue too.
Roberts was apparently alarmed by rumors. Hong was looking for financial guarantees. Ultimately, Roberts actually fled Nanjing later during the rebellion, suggesting how deep the divergence was. Some argue Hong might have initially tried to use religion for personal gain, but fundamentally he couldn't connect deeply with Roberts because he wasn't ready to just accept orthodox dogma. His main goal was already set: overthrow the king, establish a new order. This encounter really highlights how unique and syncretic Hong's interpretation was, totally distinct from mainstream Protestantism. Think of it like a kind of decision path. Hong's visions plus Liang Fa's book led to his initial interpretation. Seeking validation from Roberts resulted in a clash. Hong's path was already fixed on revolution, with religion as a powerful tool, while Roberts focused purely on religious conversion. Their objectives just didn't align.
Okay, so despite the friction with Roberts, Hong's own conviction just seemed to get stronger. How did he then go about building his own movement?
Well, after that encounter, Hong formally established his association of followers in 1847. He called them the Worshippers of God, or the God-Worshipping Society. He started spreading his unique teachings, attracting significant numbers, especially Hakka peasants from Guangxi and Guangdong. These were groups often marginalized and historically anti-Qing, so they were receptive. The society initially stood out from other Chinese secret societies because of its Christian elements, but it grew incredibly fast. By 1850, it had over 10,000 members. This really marks the shift from Hong's personal spiritual journey to the foundation of a proper mass movement, ready to challenge the established order.
Right. So Hong Xiuquan's path to leadership was forged through personal failure, these profound mystical visions interpreted via Christian texts, and then a clear split from Western orthodoxy because of his own revolutionary goals. And this all led to forming the God-Worshipping Society, setting the stage for direct conflict with the king.
Which raises that crucial question again. Was his religious belief sincere or just a tool? Some contemporaries, like the American envoy Humphrey Marshall, and later scholars like Fan Wenlan, a communist historian, argued it was an outer cloak to rally the discontented for political aims.
But others disagreed.
Yes. Contemporaries like Thomas Meadows, a British diplomat, and Joseph Edkins, a missionary, argued for his sincerity. They pointed to his later withdrawal from politics and his unwavering conviction even as his kingdom fell apart. Recent scholarship, like Kitanov and Kodunova in 2024, supports the idea that his worldview genuinely embodied both religion and ideology. What's fascinating is, even if he started with some manipulation, the evidence suggests his conviction deepened over time. His visions became absolute truth for him and his followers. It's this complex mix of ambition, belief, and political reality that makes simple judgments difficult.
Not just a simple case of using religion for politics.
Exactly. It was more interwoven than that. So Hong's unique personal journey, marked by rejection and these profound spiritual experiences, led him to synthesize this radical syncretic Christian ideology, an ideology that resonated deeply with the marginalized, becoming the driving force for a new mass movement aiming to overthrow the king and establish a completely new order. You can see how his personal story intertwined with the broader societal crises to ignite the rebellion.
Got it. Let's do some quick flashcards for this chapter. Hong Xiuquan. Failed exams. 4x. Dissolution with Confucianism. Key text. Liang Fei's good words to exhort the world. Visions. Interpreted as meeting Jehovah, Father, and Jesus, older brother. Robert's meeting. Highlighted theological differences. No financial backing. God worshippers. Formed 1847. Grew to 10,000 plus by 1850. Mostly Hakka peasants. New name. Xiuquan. Perfect. Reflecting his transformation. And a multiple choice question. Hong Xiuquan's initial Christian understanding was primarily derived from A. Direct instruction from Issachar Roberts, B. The Bible published in Nanjing in 1853, C. Liang Fei's good words to exhort the world, D. Ancient Chinese Confucian texts. The answer is C. Liang Fei's book was his key early source. Okay, so the God-worshipping society is formed. Hong Xiuquan's vision for a new China starts taking shape. What were the core ideas of this radical new ideology? How to directly challenge the Qing regime?
The Taiping ideology was really groundbreaking for its time. A unique synthesis, totally distinct from both traditional Chinese thought and Orthodox Christianity. It was crafted to provide this comprehensive framework not just for understanding China's problems, but for solving them. It wasn't about reform, it was about total transformation. Hong explicitly rejected Confucian symbols, Buddhist rituals. He believed the Manchu dynasty had provoked God's wrath. He quoted the admonition, "Who obeys heaven will be saved, but the disobedient will perish."
So his visions made him believe he was Jesus' younger brother. That's an extraordinary claim. How did that underpin his doctrine? What was his understanding of God, heaven, hell?
Right. First, and most provocatively, his belief that he was the younger brother of Jesus gave him immense authority, a divine mandate. This outstanding position in the Christian world, as he saw it, was the foundation for his conviction that he had to do something great for the people oppressed by the king. His doctrine stated everything was created by an omnipotent, omnipresent God who cared for people during life. After death, your soul either went to paradise, Qianguo, for eternal happiness, or, if you were disobedient, you became a demon doomed to eternal suffering in hell. But here's the fascinating part. Hong's heavenly kingdom wasn't just an afterlife paradise. It was a heavenly kingdom to be established on earth right here, right now.
So Tianguo wasn't just heaven later, but heaven now.
Exactly. The name of the Taiping state itself, Tianguo, heavenly kingdom, was taken directly from Matthew's Gospel, the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5.3. This gave their political movement this sacred immediate urgency, making revolution a divine duty. This was different from many religions promising paradise only after death, and it was layered onto a specific Chinese idea. After founding the kingdom, he intended to establish his own heavenly dynasty on earth. This blend of the sacred and the political was absolutely central to his unique ideology. Divine mission meets earthly revolution.
And this ideology was deeply anti-Qing. How did his manifestos portray the Manchus? What specific grievances did he use to delegitimize their rule?
Hong's critique was sharp, direct, often playing on cultural sensitivities to justify the rebellion as divinely ordained and ethnically necessary. He taught that all people were children of God who had the power to overthrow the king and find happiness in heaven by doing so. In his manifestos, he used this analogy. China was the head. The Qing government was the feet. He said the feet are elevated above the head. A total inversion, and it was the Taiping's mission to eliminate this chaos, restore proper order.
Powerful imagery.
Very. He called the Manchus a barbaric dynasty, contemptuously calling them Tatars, a term highlighting their foreignness, which resonated with anti-Manchu feelings. He listed specific examples of Qing lack of order, like forcing Chinese men to shave the front of their heads and wear the queue, the pigtail. He claimed this turned them into wild beasts and violated Confucian ideas about the sanctity of the body.
Right, that hairstyle was a huge point of contention.
It was. He also condemned abandoning traditional Chinese clothes for barbaric Manchu attire and criticized Qing marriage practices, saying Chinese beauties were forced to share the bed with lecherous foxes, his term for Manchus. He also railed against bribery, changes to the Chinese language, and a key military grievance, The large Chinese army was subordinate to a much smaller Manchu army. These weren't just political complaints, they were framed as religious offenses, portraying the king as defying God's will, deserving divine punishment. Texts like the Manifesto on the Destruction of Northern Barbarians by the Will of Heaven were crucial here.
So, beyond attacking the king, the Taipings proposed some really radical social reforms. What was their vision for this new society, especially on things like land and gender equality, and how did it work out in practice?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Theory versus practice. Hong set out to build this heavenly kingdom, Taiping Tianguo, based on a strict moral code valuing community over the individual. The key document was the land system of the Celestial Dynasty, published in 1853. In theory, it outlined this profoundly egalitarian society. It said all lands in the empire must be cultivated by all the people in the empire as a common concern. It prescribed sharing harvests, ensuring that if there is a famine at one place, the surplus food of the place yielding good crops must be transported to relieve the famine-stricken place.
So total communal sharing.
That was the ideal. The goal was for all the people in the empire to enjoy together the abundant happiness provided by the Heavenly Father, ensuring all places will share the abundance equally and all will be equally well-fed and clothed. All personal property money, jewelry was supposed to be pooled to build the army, basically an abolition of private property in theory. And on gender equality, they were remarkably progressive for the time. Women held important roles, even in the military and administration. Practices like foot binding were strictly forbidden, along with opium and prostitution. Hong told followers dying in battle led straight to paradise.
That sounds incredibly radical, but you said in theory.
Right. Because in practice, very little land reform was actually implemented. The constant demands of warfare just overwhelmed everything. While they successfully mobilized the marginalized with this vision of equality, their radical anti-Confucian stance, their perceived sectarianism, and the sometimes brutal nature of their army massacres, seizing property alienated the wealthy gentry and officials.
So they couldn't win over the educated class.
Largely, no. Which hindered recruitment of skilled administrators and made it hard to govern effectively outside the major cities they controlled. There was a big gap between the grand vision and the messy reality of war and administration.
So how did this group of worshippers become such a powerful military force? What were their key early victories?
Well, the god worshippers were ready to fight by the summer of 1850. Then, on January 11th, 1851, after successfully fighting off a Qing force, a crucial early win, Hong declared himself the heavenly king of the heavenly kingdom of great peace, Taiping Tianguo. The society was militarized, hereditary king and marquee positions were created. They attracted millions of peasants, unemployed workers, marginalized groups like the Hakka. This allowed them to form a formidable army, starting around 37,000 strong but growing rapidly. Over the next 3 years, they had stunning military success, sweeping through southern China. Their greatest victory came in March 1853, the capture of Nanjing.
Nanjing, a former imperial capital, right? Huge symbolic win.
Absolutely huge. Nanjing became the capital of the Heavenly Kingdom. It showed just how vulnerable the Qing were. Hong saw it as the first crucial step to building paradise on Earth.
So Nanjing becomes Tianjing, the heavenly capital. What was life like there under Taiping rule, and what internal problems started to undermine them?
In Nanjing, or Tianjing, they tried to implement their vision. Communal life, strict moral codes, no opium, alcohol, prostitution, theoretically, land redistribution. Women held significant roles. But despite these ideals and early wins, the leaders struggled to consolidate authority beyond the big cities. They seemed to prefer ruling major centers rather than building effective local governance everywhere. This created vulnerabilities. But more critically, internal divisions and jealousies became a massive problem. Hong Xiuquan increasingly withdrew from day-to-day affairs, leaving power to others. And some of these leaders fell into decadence, completely contrary to Taiping ideals.
Power struggles.
Yes. The most significant was between Hong and Yang Shuking, the East King. Yang claimed to channel God's voice and sought supreme power, even plotting against Hong. Yang was eventually killed in a preemptive attack by other Taiping leaders in 1856. It was a brutal internal purge that decimated the leadership.
Wow. Killing their own leaders.
Yes, thousands died in Nanjing in this purge. It removed capable commanders and severely weakened trust and cohesion. They also struggled to recruit educated scholars and officials. Many were alienated by the theocracy, the anti-Confucianism, the leaders' lack of traditional education. This hampered effective administration. So this internal strife, especially the 1856 purge, fatally undermined the unity that had fueled their early success.
Okay, let's recap this chapter. The Taiping Rebellion, led by Hong Xiuquan, created this unique theocracy aiming for a heavenly kingdom on Earth. Their ideology attacked the king as barbaric, proposed radical reforms like communal property and gender equality, and they had amazing early military success capturing Nanjing. But they struggled to actually implement reforms, and crucially, severe internal divisions and leadership problems started to tear them apart from within.
And connecting this back to the scholarship, there's that debate again. Was the religion just an outer cloak for a political program? A. Kozlov's 2020 research really emphasizes how central the Bible and Hong's radical reinterpretation of it was to the whole ideology. It wasn't just a cloak, it was a deeply integrated worldview, making Hong, as Kidanoff and Kodanova suggest, the embodiment of both religion and ideology.
So more complex than just a political tool.
Right. And the sources also show how Taiping Christianity was deeply influenced by Chinese popular religion, Confucianism, Taoism, even though they tried to break from tradition. Hong quoted Confucian classics, emphasized filial piety. It highlights the syncretic nature of it all, not just a foreign import, but a distinct Chinese adaptation, which explains both its mass appeal and why it alienated the traditional elite. It challenges that idea of a purely pragmatic religious front.
I see. A complex blend.
Definitely. So you can see the Heavenly Kingdom was built on this radical ideology, mixing Christian ideas with Chinese aspirations aimed at immediate real-world change. Their initial surge showed the deep discontent with the king, but the friction between utopian ideals and the reality of governing, plus fatal internal conflicts, began to undermine their incredible ambition. This really sets the stage for their eventual fall.
Got it. Time for flashcards for this chapter. Core ideology. Hong, Jesus' younger brother. Goal. Earthly paradise. Tianguo. Anti-king. Call barbarians. Criticize Q hairstyle. King marriage customs. Use head versus feet analogy. Reforms theory. Land system. Communal. Gender equality. Women and army admin. No foot binding. Moral codes. Early success. Hong declared heavenly king 1851. Nanjing captured 1853 and made capital Tianjin. Internal issues. Hong's withdrawal. Yang Xiuqing power struggle and purge 1856. Failure to win over gentry. And a multiple choice check. Which of the following social reforms was not a key tenet of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom? A. Abolition of private property. B. Redistribution of land based on family size. C. Reinstated of Q hairstyle. D. Equality of the sexes. The answer is C. They vehemently opposed the Q. So despite those incredible early successes, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom eventually collapsed. What factors led to their decline? And how did foreign powers, initially neutral, get involved on the king side?
The Taiping defeat was really a complex outcome, a result of various sociopolitical, economic, military, and diplomatic factors all coming together. Their decline really highlights the challenges of sustaining such a radical movement against a determined, even if weakened, imperial power, especially when outside interests get involved.
Hong Xiuquan himself declined significantly in the later years. What are the different stories about his death? How did it impact the rebellion?
Yes, by 1856, Hong's health started deteriorating, and there are conflicting accounts of how he died. Some sources say he committed suicide by poison on June 1st, 1864. After the king gained a decisive advantage, his body later found in a sewer. Hope was lost. Others suggest he died of illness, possibly food poisoning from eating wild vegetables because food was so scarce during the siege of Nanjing.
Desperate times.
Indeed. His body was buried near the old Ming Palace, but later dug up by the Manchus to confirm his death. Then cremated and his ashes fired from a cannon.
Fired from a cannon.
A symbolic act, really, to ensure that he would not find a final place to rest, to deny him spiritual peace and prevent his legacy from inspiring future rebels. 4 months before dying, he passed the throne to his young son, Hong Tianguifu, who was far too inexperienced. Regardless of the exact cause, Hong's death was a massive blow, coinciding with the final collapse.
What was the final fate of Nanjing, the Taiping capital?
Yeah.
What was the human cost when it fell?
Nanjing, the heart of the Heavenly Kingdom, finally fell to Qing troops on July 19, 1864. And it wasn't just a military defeat, it was a brutal massacre. The death toll was staggering, more than 100,000 people killed in the city.
100,000, just in Nanjing.
Yes. It shows the sheer ferocity with which the king suppressed the rebellion, an immense human toll, a horrifying event that really encapsulates the brutality of the war's end.
Okay, so Western powers were initially neutral, maybe even intrigued by the Christian elements. What changed their minds? Why did they end up helping the king?
You're right. Initially, they were strictly neutral, intrigued by the Christian aspects, hoping maybe it would open China up more. But several things shifted their stance. Hong's perceived arrogance, the leader's extravagance, that didn't help. But critically, it was the Taiping's strict ban on opium.
Ah, the opium trade again.
Exactly. That ban directly threatened vital British economic interests. Britain relied heavily on the opium trade to balance its trade deficit with China. So it became a pragmatic decision based on economics, not ideology, protecting trade routes and profits. European forces, especially British and French, started providing military aid, weapons, training to the king. Foreign mercenaries formed units like the ever-victorious army, led by Western officers. They played a crucial role, especially around Shanghai and Nanjing.
So foreign intervention tipped the balance.
It certainly amplified the king's advantages and hastened the collapse, but it's important to see it as amplifying existing internal problems within the Taiping movement, rather than being the sole cause. It's a classic example of foreign intervention driven by self-interest trade and profits, not morality.
Yeah, you can imagine being a Western merchant, your fortune tied to opium. A new regime comes in banning it. Your neutrality suddenly becomes quite interested in who wins.
Precisely. The economic calculus was paramount. Overall factors in defeat.
So putting it all together, what led to the final defeat? Was it inevitable?
It was multifaceted. Some argue Hong's ideology wasn't a sincere religious revelation, but more a means of gaining authority, making faith an unstable add-on to economic drivers. This clash with political reality hurt them. The movement shifted from religious society to political threat mainly after the king attacked them. Then you have critical internal weaknesses. Those leadership struggles, the inability to win over the gentry, poor administration outside the main cities. Combine that with the king adapting using those regional Han armies and decisive foreign intervention, it became an insurmountable challenge. Plus, their failure to capture Beijing early on meant the Qing government remained intact, able to fight back. It wasn't just one thing, but this whole constellation of internal and external factors.
Okay, quick recap of this section. The Taiping's demise was sealed by Hong Xiuquan's death, the brutal fall of Nanjing, and crucially, foreign powers switching from neutrality to intervention, largely due to economic self-interest like protecting the opium trade. Compounding this were the Taiping's own internal divisions and governance failures, leading to their catastrophic defeat.
Although it's worth noting a nuance here. While foreign intervention is often cited as the killer blow, some scholars, including one of our sources, argue that the idea the defeat was solely due to foreign intervention is far less certain.
Oh, so not the main cause.
The argument is that foreign forces certainly helped the king and amplified existing dynamics, but they weren't the principal instigator of the collapse. Their role was more of an accelerant. The internal weaknesses, poor governance, alienating the gentry, those devastating internal purges arguably played a more fundamental role in whether the movement could have succeeded long-term. It raises that important question. How much responsibility lies with internal actors versus external forces in these conflicts?
Right, a complex interplay.
Definitely. So the Taiping's path from uprising to defeat was shaped by this mix of internal decay and external pressure. Hong's death, Nanjing's fall, foreign intervention, combined with their own governance issues, sealed their fate. It really shows how even strongly ideological movements can crumble against the realities of power, politics, and pragmatism. What stands out to you in this tragic ending?
Okay, flashcards for the decline. Hong's death. 1864, poison illness debate, body exhumed, desecrated, Nanjing Falls. July 19, 1864, massacre, 100,000 plus dead, foreign intervention, shift from neutrality to supporting king. Motives, protecting opium trade, dislike of Taiping, radicalism, arrogance. Foreign forces, British, French aid, ever-victorious army, overall defeat. Internal weakness primary, accelerated by external pressure, and a multiple-choice test. A key reason foreign powers shifted from neutrality to supporting the king was A, their ideological alignment with Confucianism, B, the Taiping's embrace of Western democracy, C, the Taiping's prohibition of lucrative opium trade, D, their desire to see a stronger centralized China. The answer is C, the opium trade. Okay, the rebellion ended devastation, but its impact lasted far longer than the fighting itself. What were the immediate and long-term consequences for China? And how do historians still debate its true nature?
The Taiping Rebellion left this absolutely indelible mark on China. It fundamentally altered its society, economy, political structure, really shaped the course of modern Chinese history. It was a crucible, forcing profound, often involuntary changes within the Qing Empire.
Let's start with the most horrifying consequence, the human toll. What was the scale of this tragedy? How does it compare to other major global conflicts?
The most immediate, devastating consequence was the loss of life. Estimates vary, but they range from 20 to 30 million people. Some researchers push those figures as high as 70 million, even 100 million deaths.
100 million, that's almost unimaginable.
It is. It makes it unequivocally one of the bloodiest civil wars in all of history, comparable to or even exceeding the losses of World War I. A huge portion of these deaths weren't directly from fighting, but from famine and plague, made worse by the destruction, poor hygiene, lack of care as millions fled conquered areas. This led to mass migrations, significant depopulation, especially in the rich Yangtze Delta region. The war ruined China's wealthiest provinces, destroyed cities and infrastructure, severely disrupted farming and trade, huge economic shocks. To give some perspective, look at these comparisons from the source. Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, 20-30 million, potentially to 100 million. World War I, 1914-1918, 15 million. World War II, 1939-1945, 50-80 million. American Civil War, 1861-1865, about 0.6 to 0.75 million.
Wow. That really puts into perspective, dwarfs the American Civil War.
Absolutely. It highlights why the Taiping Rebellion, often overlooked in the West, is just historically paramount in terms of human cost, a true demographic catastrophe.
You have to imagine entire regions just laid waste, land scarred, cities in ruins, the silence of depopulation hanging over everything, not just a war, but a societal collapse on an unbelievable scale. The rebellion almost toppled the king, but paradoxically, it also forced them to change. How did this conflict reshape the Qing dynasty's internal structure? How did it lead to decentralization?
Right. The rebellion brutally exposed the military and administrative weaknesses of the king. It forced the dynasty to rely heavily on regional armies raised by Han Chinese officials, not the traditional Manchu forces. This led to a significant decentralization of power. Provincial leaders gained unprecedented influence and fiscal autonomy. Desperate need for money to fight the war led to new local taxes, especially the Lejin or Lekin tax, basically a tax on goods being transported or sold locally.
So local governments got more power to tax.
Exactly. It fundamentally transformed China's fiscal structure, strengthened local fiscal capacity. It forced a kind of modernization from the bottom up. The rebellion also directly pushed the Qing government to launch the self-strengthening movement, an effort to adopt Western military tech and industrial practices to modernize the empire. So this transformation, while it saved the dynasty for a while, fundamentally changed its centralized structure. It led to this persistent decentralization, shifting from state maintaining under partnership towards state weakening under warlordism, really sowing the seeds for future fragmentation, influence on Chinese nationalism, and subsequent revolutions.
Beyond the king itself, how did the Taiping Rebellion resonate later? How did it influence Chinese revolutionaries and contribute to modern Chinese nationalism?
The Taiping Rebellion, with its strong anti-Manchu nationalism and calls for a new Chinese state, is widely seen as a precursor to modern Chinese nationalism and the eventual overthrow of the king in 1911. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the Republic of China, was deeply inspired by stories of Taiping survivors. He famously called himself the successor of Hong Xiuquan, drawing ambition from their tales.
Oh, really? He saw himself as Hong's successor.
He did. His three people's principles, nationalism, democracy, people's livelihood, can be seen as echoing Taiping nationalism, just updated with later ideas. Even Chiang Kai-shek initially sympathized with the Taipings, though he later shifted his view. It highlights the complex legacy. Some see them as a traditional peasant revolt, others a feudal cult. Some early communists saw them as a proto-communist revolution because of their egalitarian ideas. This ongoing debate just reflects the movement's multifaceted nature and its enduring influence on Chinese political thought.
We've covered the human cost, but what about the environmental damage? How did the Qing military strategy impact the landscape?
The Qing strategy of fortifying the walls, clearing the fields, Jiambi Kinye, designed to starve the rebels, had severe and lasting environmental consequences. This tactic was a form of environmental warfare. It led to the collapse of dikes, widespread deforestation of highlands, drying up of riverbeds, profoundly undermining the land's resilience.
So destroying the environment was part of the strategy.
Yes, deliberate. And funds meant for maintaining vital hydraulic systems, irrigation, flood control were diverted to the military. So those systems degraded, leaving regions vulnerable to future floods and droughts for generations. It shows how short-term military goals can create long-term ecological problems. Research by Sean Liu in 2025 explicitly links this strategy to ecological devastation, highlighting it wasn't just a side effect, but a deliberate destructive tactic with enduring consequences.
Okay, quick recap of this legacy section. The Taiping Rebellion's impact. Immense, devastating, millions dead, regions ruined. Yet, paradoxically, it forced Qing decentralization and modernization efforts, fueled Chinese nationalism, and left deep environmental scars from deliberate environmental warfare. Its true nature is still debated.
And what's really fascinating is this nuanced view from recent studies like Lai, Zhu, and Yang 2023. They argue that despite the destruction, the rebellion paradoxically led to positive long-term institutional and social changes in some areas.
Positive changes.
In the late Taiping areas, regions hit hardest later in the war. The destruction of old land titles and the weakening of traditional landlords actually led to better land property rights for peasants afterwards. The forced fiscal decentralization strengthened local state capacity and social capital, fostering the growth of charity organizations. And incredibly, these changes correlate with better long-term development, higher incomes, and even fewer deaths during the Great Famine of 1959-1961 in those specific regions decades later.
Wow. So the devastation inadvertently cleared the way for better systems.
In some specific ways, in some specific places, yes. It challenges the view of conflict as purely destructive. It suggests these huge upheavals can act as tipping points, dismantling inefficient old structures, unintentionally paving the way for more resilient institutions. A profound example of creative destruction, albeit born from immense suffering.
A paradox of suffering leading to unexpected positive adaptations.
Precisely. So the Taiping Rebellion, a monumental human tragedy, was also this unwitting catalyst for profound change. Weakened the Qing center, but fostered regional strength, sparked nationalism, left ecological scars and surprising institutional adaptations. This complex, paradoxical legacy makes it so relevant for understanding historical change. What stands out to you as the most surprising impact?
All right, bullet point flashcards for the legacy. Death toll. 2030 Evan, up to 100 Evan. One of history's deadliest civil wars. Qing changes. Decentralization. Regional armies gain power. Legend tax introduced. Self-strengthening movement launched. Nationalism. Seen as precursor to 1911 revolution. Inspired Sun Yat-sen. Environmental. Jianbi Qing strategy. Environmental warfare. Damaged dikes. Caused deforestation. Paradoxical positives. Recent research. Better property rights. Stronger local fiscal social capacity in late Taiping areas. Correlated with fewer famine deaths, 1959-61. And a multiple choice check. Which of these was an unexpected positive long-term impact of the Taiping Rebellion, according to recent research? A. Re-centralization of Qing imperial power. B. Widespread adoption of traditional Confucian education. C. Improved property rights and local fiscal capacity in certain regions. D. Complete eradication of foreign influence in China. The answer is C. Improved property rights and local capacity in some areas. Okay, our deep dive isn't complete without looking at the very latest scholarship. How is recent research, say, from 2020 to 2025, giving us fresh insights into this massive conflict?
Well, contemporary research is using new methods, interdisciplinary approaches to shed light on previously unexplored aspects of the Taiping Rebellion. It's offering fresh interpretations of its causes, its character, its long-term consequences, really moving beyond established narratives to uncover deeper complexities.
You mentioned environmental warfare earlier. What new details does Sean Liu's 2025 research add about the Qing strategy and its ecological impact?
Sean Liu's 2025 article, Jianbi Qinggi, The Environmental Warfare of the Taiping Rebellion, provides crucial insights. It explicitly frames that Qing strategy, fortifying walls, clearing fields, as deliberate environmental warfare. It wasn't just collateral damage, it was a tactic to starve the rebels by destroying their means of survival. The research highlights direct consequences. Dike collapses, massive deforestation, drying riverbeds.
Undermining the land's resilience.
Profoundly. And the diversion of funds from vital hydraulic system maintenance to the military led to long-term degradation, making areas vulnerable to future floods and droughts. This research directly links environmental history to military strategy, showing how actions during conflict can deeply affect future resources and societal resilience for generations. It emphasizes that even historically, society strategically manipulated environments in conflict, often with deep unintended consequences.
And this brings us back to those surprising positive long-term impacts. What do studies by Eugenie and Lai, Xu, and Yang tell us about the rebellion's influence on China's fiscal and social structures decades later?
All right, this area of research really reevaluates the legacy. Eugenie's 2020 research shows how the rebellion triggered major fiscal transitions. The decline of traditional land taxes, the rise of local indirect taxes like the Lujin. This accelerated the collapse of the centralized system, led to persistent decentralization, forcing this fiscal modernization from below. And even more strikingly, Lai, Xu, and Yang's 2023 study, that's the one titled Property Rights, Fiscal Capacity, and Social Capacity. The lasting impact of the Taiping Rebellion shows that despite the devastation, the rebellion had positive long-term impacts in certain late Taiping areas, specifically strengthening land property rights, improving local fiscal capacity, boosting social capital, and the development of charity organizations.
And this linked to better outcomes later.
Yes, correlated with higher income, more tax revenue, and remarkably, fewer deaths during the Great Famine of 1959-1961 in those specific areas. It's a highly nuanced perspective, moving beyond just destruction to explore complex adaptation and resilience, suggesting the rebellion acted as creative destruction, inadvertently fostering institutional innovations that help China modernize. It challenges deterministic views of history, showing how devastating conflicts can trigger positive adaptive responses with unexpected legacies.
Finally, let's touch on the ongoing academic debates. How are scholars today interpreting the fundamental nature of the Taiping Rebellion? Was it a cult, a revolution, something else entirely?
That debate is still very much alive. Xiangru Ren's 2022 article and Binqing Mao's 2021 study, Mob Ideology or Democracy, show this well. Ren argues it was complex, showing traits of both a feudal cult and a progressive revolution, highlighting its unique use of foreign religion and its anti-imperial stance. Mao, however, argues the Taiping's mob ideology, driven by self-interest and massacres, alienated potential allies and led to defeat, contrasting it with the more successful 1911 revolution. Amit Bhattacharya's 2023 work emphasizes the crucial role of local elites, arguing their actions fundamentally altered local politics, sometimes helping the king, shifting patterns of power, highlighting local action beyond the big narrative.
Right, not just top down.
Exactly. And A. Kozlov's 2020 research reaffirms the central role of Hong Xiuquan's radical reinterpretation of Christian ideology in shaping the whole movement. These contemporary analyses just underscore how multifaceted the Taiping Rebellion was. It refuses to fit neatly into simple boxes like peasant revolt or religious cult, continually enriching our understanding of its complex legacy.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together for a final recap of our entire deep dive. We started with China, on the brink Qing corruption, foreign intervention, demographic pressure, environmental collapse. Then we traced Hong Xiuquan's incredible journey failed scholar to divine prophet, whose unique take on Christianity ignited this massive rebellion. We explored the audacious vision of the heavenly kingdom, its radical social reforms, its meteoric rise, followed by its tragic internal divisions and external pressures leading to collapse.
And finally, we dissected its profound legacy, the staggering human cost, the forced transformation of the king, its catalytic role in Chinese nationalism, and these recent, even paradoxical findings showing how the cataclysm also inadvertently fostered positive long-term institutional changes. What we see in the Taiping Rebellion isn't just a historical event. It's a powerful case study in societal resilience, adaptability, and the complex, often unpredictable consequences of even the most destructive conflicts.
And to help lock it all in, think back to that 430 million population figure, the immense pressure. Remember, Hong's visions interpreted as a divine mandate. Recall the Lijin tax, that direct fiscal legacy born from war. And consider that figure of 20 to 30 million deaths, maybe more, a scar on history. These are key anchors.
Absolutely. So, key concepts to retain. Hong Xiuquan, disillusioned scholar, divine visions, Jesus' younger brother, God-worshipping society, Christian-inspired, syncretic, anti-king sect, Taiping Tianguo, heavenly kingdom of great peace, aiming for earthly paradise. Key tenets: egalitarianism theory, land redistribution theory, gender equality, bans on opium foot binding. King weaknesses: corruption, opium war defeats, population pressure, disasters, foreign intervention, shifted from neutral to pro-king, economic motives, opium, human cost, 20, 30 million plus deaths, one of history's deadliest civil wars, king transformation, decentralization, Lijin tax, self-strengthening movement, legacy debates, peasant revolt, cult, proto-communist, nationalist precursor, recent insights, environmental warfare, Jambi Kingi, positive institutional changes, property rights, fiscal social capacity in some areas.
Perfect. Let's wrap up with 3 final multiple-choice questions. 1. Which European powers' economic interests were most directly threatened by the Taiping's moral policies leading to their intervention? A. France. B. Russia. C. Great Britain. D. Germany. The answer is C. Great Britain. 2. The Lijin tax introduced during the Taiping Rebellion was primarily a form of A. Land tax. B. Local indirect tax on goods. C. Income tax on gentry. D. Imperial customs duty. The answer is B. Local indirect tax on goods. 3. According to recent research, which of these was a surprising long-term positive impact observed in late Taiping areas? A. A return to a fully centralized Qing administration. B. Stronger local land property rights. C. Decreased engagement in local charitable activities. D. A significant increase in Confucian schools. And the answer is B. Stronger local land property rights. What does this all mean? The Taiping Rebellion really stands as this stark reminder that even the most catastrophic events can be deeply paradoxical. A war of unimaginable devastation. Yet it inadvertently acted as this powerful, brutal catalyst, dismantling old, inefficient structures, forging new paths for adaptation and development. It forces us to ask, can profound societal suffering sometimes be an unintended, maybe even horrific, precursor to necessary long-term change? It certainly gives you something to mull over.
Absolutely. You've now navigated the complex currents of the Taiping Rebellion, gaining a really detailed understanding, far beyond the simple summaries. This deep dive should equip you with a richer lens to view not only Chinese history, but also those broader dynamics of conflict, societal resilience, and the often hidden long-term impacts of seemingly destructive forces. Keep asking those critical questions. There's always more to learn, always more perspectives to consider.